Sergeant Major William Thompson stood at the departure gate of London Heathrow Airport, his crisp uniform drawing respectful nods from passing travelers. The polished Victoria Cross gleamed on his chest, catching the fluorescent lights overhead. After 25 years of distinguished service in the British Army and 5 years as a royal guard at Buckingham Palace, he was finally taking his first vacation in 3 years. The morning had started perfectly. His commanding officer had personally arranged for William to fly business class to Edinburgh, where he planned to visit his elderly mother who hadn't seen him in months due to his demanding duties protecting the royal family. The upgrade was a small token of appreciation for his extraordinary service record, which included 2 tours in Afghanistan and heroic actions that earned him Britain's highest military decoration. William approached the check-in counter with his boarding pass and identification. The young airline representative, Sarah Mitchell, looked up from her computer screen with a professional smile that quickly faded when she saw his military uniform. Her eyes lingered on the Victoria Cross for a moment, before she began typing rapidly on her keyboard. "I'm sorry, sir, but there seems to be an issue with your booking," Sarah said, her tone suddenly cold and dismissive. "We've had to make some adjustments due to overbooking in the business class cabin." William remained calm, as his military training had taught him. "What kind of adjustments?" "My commanding officer specifically arranged this booking through your corporate office." Sarah continued typing without looking up. "Unfortunately, we'll need to move you to economy class. There's nothing we can do about it now. The business class is needed for our priority customers." The words stung more than any battlefield wound William had endured. He had served his country with honor, received the Victoria Cross for saving the lives of 12 civilians during a Taliban attack, and spent years protecting the very symbols of British heritage. Yet here he stood, being treated as a second-class citizen by someone who appeared to have no understanding of sacrifice or service. "Miss, I believe there's been a misunderstanding," William said politely. "This ticket was arranged through official channels and I have all the proper documentation." Sarah's expression hardened. "Sir, I don't care what uniform you're wearing or what medals you have. Rules are rules, and we have paying customers who take priority. You can either accept the economy seat or find another flight." Other passengers in line began to notice the commotion. An elderly gentleman behind William stepped forward, clearly agitated by what he was witnessing. "Excuse me, young lady, but do you have any idea who you're speaking to? That's the Victoria Cross he's wearing." Sarah glanced dismissively at the elderly man. "I don't care if it's the crown jewels. Company policy is company policy." William felt his jaw tighten, but he maintained his composure. Years of serving alongside His Majesty's forces had taught him dignity in the face of adversity. However, the public humiliation of being downgraded while wearing his dress uniform, complete with the nation's highest honor for valor, was almost unbearable. The situation escalated when Sarah called for security, claiming that William was being difficult and disruptive. 2 airport security officers approached, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, as they recognized the significance of his uniform and decorations. "Is there a problem here?" one of the security officers asked, directing his question to William rather than the airline representative. "No problem at all," William replied with military precision. "I'm simply trying to understand why my confirmed business class seat has been given away." The security officer looked at Sarah with obvious disapproval. "Ma'am, this gentleman is clearly military personnel with high honors. Perhaps you could reconsider?" Sarah's response was swift and cutting. "I don't care if he's the Queen's personal bodyguard. He gets economy or nothing." The irony of her statement wasn't lost on William or the growing crowd of onlookers. He had indeed served as one of the Queen's personal protection officers, and continued to serve in that capacity for King Charles. The very institution this airline claimed to serve was being dishonored by their representatives' actions. As William stood there, weighing his options, he couldn't help but think about the countless times he had put his life on the line for his country. The Taliban attack that earned him the Victoria Cross flashed through his mind. He remembered carrying wounded civilians to safety while under heavy gunfire, never once considering his own survival above theirs. Now, in his own country, at his own nation's premier airport, he was being treated with less respect than he had shown to enemy prisoners of war. The contrast was stark and painful. William made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his phone and with steady hands began recording the interaction. If he was going to be humiliated, At least there would be a record of how Britain's heroes were being treated by companies that profited from the very freedom he had fought to protect. As William held his phone steady, capturing Sarah's dismissive attitude and unprofessional behavior, other passengers began pulling out their own devices. The elderly gentleman who had spoken up earlier introduced himself as Robert Harrison, a retired Royal Navy officer, and he too began recording the incident. "This is absolutely disgraceful," Robert muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've never seen such disrespect shown to a Victoria Cross recipient in my life." Sarah noticed the phones and became increasingly agitated. "You can't record me without permission. This is harassment." "Actually, ma'am," William said calmly, "this is a public space and I have every right to document how I'm being treated. This will serve as evidence of your company's policies regarding military personnel." The crowd of onlookers continued to grow, and whispers spread quickly through the departure lounge. Business travelers, families, and airport staff all began to understand what was happening. A young mother with 2 children approached William. "Excuse me, sir, but I couldn't help but notice your medal. My grandfather served in World War II, and he always taught us to respect those who serve. This is completely wrong." William nodded gratefully. "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your support." Sarah, realizing she was losing control of the situation, called for her supervisor. Within minutes, a middle-aged man in a wrinkled shirt arrived, looking harried and clearly annoyed at being pulled away from his office duties. "What's the problem here?" The supervisor, Marcus Webb, asked without bothering to assess the situation properly. Sarah quickly launched into her version of events. "This passenger is refusing to accept his seat assignment and is causing a disturbance. He's demanding special treatment just because he's in the military." Marcus glanced briefly at William, his eyes skipping over the Victoria Cross as if it were merely costume jewelry. "Sir, I understand you're upset, but we have policies to follow. We've had to make adjustments due to overbooking, and we're offering you a seat in economy at no additional charge." William's patience was wearing thin, but his military discipline held firm. "Mr. Webb, I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for the seat that was properly booked and confirmed through your corporate office by my commanding officer. This isn't a personal vacation I'm demanding upgrades for. This was arranged through official military channels." "Look," Marcus said with obvious irritation, "I don't care who booked it or how it was booked. We have paying customers who need those seats and they take priority." The statement hit William like a physical blow. The implication was clear. His service to country meant nothing compared to the airline's profit margins. The very people he had sworn to protect were now telling him he wasn't worth protecting in return. Robert Harrison stepped forward again, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Young man, do you have any idea what that medal represents? Do you understand the level of heroism required to earn the Victoria Cross?" Marcus barely glanced at the decoration. "I'm sure it's very nice, but medals don't pay for airplane seats." A gasp went up from the crowd. Several passengers began speaking at once, their voices filled with indignation and disbelief. One businessman, James Carter, stepped forward with his boarding pass in hand. "I'll give him my business class seat," James announced. "This is absolutely shameful. I'd rather fly economy than be associated with an airline that treats war heroes like this." William was touched by the gesture but shook his head. "That's very kind of you, sir, but that's not the point. This is about principle and respect." Marcus, sensing the growing hostility from the passengers, tried to regain control. "Everyone needs to calm down. We're trying to resolve this situation quickly so we can get the flight boarded on time. The only thing that needs resolving," called out another passenger, "is your attitude toward this gentleman. He's earned the right to be treated with respect." Sarah, meanwhile, had retreated behind the counter, clearly uncomfortable with the attention her actions had generated. She whispered something to a colleague, who looked at William with obvious embarrassment before shaking her head in disgust at Sarah's behavior. William continued recording, knowing that this footage would be important. He had learned from his military experience that documentation was crucial when dealing with injustice. His phone captured not only the airline staff's dismissive attitude but also the support and respect shown by his fellow citizens. "Mr. Webb," William said formally, "I want to make sure I understand your position correctly. You're telling me that despite having a confirmed business class ticket arranged through official military channels, and despite my service record and decorations, your airline considers me less worthy of respect than your commercial passengers?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "It's not about worthiness. It's about business. Then let me make this clear, William replied, his voice steady but firm. This isn't just about me or this flight. This is about how your company treats the men and women who serve this country, and I intend to make sure that treatment is fully documented and widely known. The crowd murmured its approval, and more phones appeared, all capturing the scene from different angles. William knew that within hours this incident would be spreading across social media, but he also knew he had one more card to play. As the tension in the departure lounge reached a breaking point, William made a decision that would escalate the situation beyond anything Marcus or Sarah could have imagined. He scrolled through his phone contacts and found a number he rarely used except in genuine emergencies. "Excuse me for just a moment," William said politely to the crowd of supporters gathered around him. "I need to make a brief call." The number belonged to Colonel Patricia Henley, the private secretary to His Majesty King Charles III. As a senior royal guard, William had her direct contact for situations involving security or protocol issues. While this wasn't technically a security matter, it was certainly an issue of protocol and respect for the Crown's representatives. "Colonel Henley speaking," came the crisp voice on the other end of the line. "Colonel, this is Sergeant Major Thompson. I apologize for disturbing you, but I'm facing an unusual situation that I believe requires your attention." William quickly explained the circumstances, speaking quietly but clearly. The crowd around him fell silent, sensing that something important was happening. Marcus and Sarah exchanged worried glances, suddenly realizing that this might be more serious than a simple passenger complaint. Colonel Henley's response was immediate and decisive. "Sergeant Major, this is absolutely unacceptable. You are representing the Crown, and any disrespect shown to you in your official capacity is disrespect shown to His Majesty. I want you to put me on speakerphone immediately." William complied, and Colonel Henley's authoritative voice filled the departure lounge. "To whom am I speaking at the airline counter?" Marcus, now visibly nervous, stepped forward. "This is Marcus Webb, Operations Supervisor for British Airways. Mr. Webb, I am Colonel Patricia Henley, Private Secretary to His Majesty King Charles III. The gentleman you are currently mistreating is Sergeant Major William Thompson, Victoria Cross, a decorated war hero and current member of His Majesty's Royal Guard. His travel arrangements were made through official Crown channels, and your treatment of him is completely unacceptable." The departure lounge fell into absolute silence. Even the ambient airport noise seemed to fade as everyone processed what they had just heard. Sarah's face had gone completely white while Marcus looked like he might be sick. "Colonel," Marcus stammered, "we weren't aware of his position. This is just a routine overbooking situation." "Mr. Webb, there is nothing routine about disrespecting a Victoria Cross recipient who serves in the royal household. Sergeant Major Thompson earned his decoration by saving 12 civilian lives under enemy fire in Afghanistan. He currently serves as one of His Majesty's personal protection officers. Your staff member's comment about not caring if he were the Queen's personal bodyguard is particularly ironic, given that he quite literally serves in that capacity for the King." Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. The crowd of passengers was now staring at her with a mixture of amazement and disgust. Several people were shaking their heads in disbelief at her earlier behavior. Colonel Henley continued, her voice carrying the weight of royal authority. "I expect this situation to be resolved immediately and appropriately. Furthermore, I will be filing a formal complaint with your corporate headquarters and the Civil Aviation Authority regarding the treatment of military personnel and Crown representatives." Marcus was frantically trying to type on his computer while juggling his phone. "Colonel, we'll fix this right away. We'll get him his business class seat immediately. Mr. Webb, this goes far beyond simply providing a seat. This is about the fundamental respect owed to those who serve our nation and our sovereign. I suggest you treat this as the serious diplomatic incident it has become." William could see passengers around him pulling out their phones again, but now they were sharing the videos they had taken with expressions of excitement rather than outrage. He realized that within minutes this story would be spreading across every social media platform in the United Kingdom. "Colonel," William said, "I appreciate your intervention, but I want to make sure this is handled properly through official channels." "Absolutely, Sergeant Major. I'm also going to inform His Majesty's office of this incident. The King takes the treatment of his service members very seriously, particularly those who have distinguished themselves in combat and continue to serve the Crown." Marcus was now sweating visibly. Colonel, please, we're going to make this right. We'll upgrade the gentleman immediately and ensure this doesn't happen again. Mr. Webb, you're missing the point. This isn't about one seat on one flight. This is about your company's policies and training regarding the treatment of military personnel. How many other service members have been treated this way by your staff? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus clearly had no good answer, and his silence spoke volumes. Colonel Henley's voice softened slightly when she addressed William. Sergeant Major, I want you to know that His Majesty will be informed of both this incident and the exemplary dignity with which you've handled it. Your conduct today reflects the highest traditions of the Royal Guard. Thank you, Colonel. I simply wanted to visit my mother, but I felt it was important to document how we're being treated. You've done exactly the right thing, Sergeant Major. Now, Mr. Webb, I trust you'll resolve this immediately. Marcus nodded frantically, even though she couldn't see him. Yes, Colonel, absolutely, right away. As William ended the call, he looked around at the faces surrounding him. The elderly Royal Navy veteran, Robert Harrison, was beaming with pride. The young mother who had spoken up earlier was explaining to her children about the importance of respecting those who serve. Even the airport security officers were standing a little straighter, clearly inspired by what they had witnessed. But William knew this was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Within 30 minutes of Colonel Henley's phone call, the Heathrow departure lounge had transformed into something resembling a media circus. The first video of William's treatment had been uploaded to social media by James Carter, the businessman who had offered his seat. Within minutes, it had been shared thousands of times across Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Marcus Webb was frantically making phone calls to his corporate headquarters, while Sarah had been quietly removed from the counter by another supervisor. William found himself surrounded not only by supportive passengers but also by journalists who had somehow materialized from various parts of the airport. Sergeant Major Thompson called out a reporter from the BBC who had been covering a different story at Heathrow. Can you tell us how you're feeling about the airline's treatment of you today? William, ever the professional soldier, maintained his composure. I'm disappointed that any service member would be treated this way, but I'm encouraged by the support shown by my fellow citizens and the swift response from His Majesty's office. Robert Harrison, the retired Royal Navy officer, stepped up beside William. What happened here today is a disgrace to British values. This man has the Victoria Cross, for heaven's sake. He's risked his life for every person in this airport, and he's treated like a second-class citizen by his own countrymen. The reporter nodded and turned back to William. We understand you currently serve as one of King Charles's royal guards. Has His Majesty been informed of this incident? Colonel Henley assured me that His Majesty's office would be briefed on the situation. William replied diplomatically. I serve at the pleasure of the Crown, and I trust that appropriate measures will be taken. Meanwhile, Marcus had returned from his phone calls looking even more distressed than before. He approached William with what appeared to be a first-class boarding pass in his hand. Sergeant Major Thompson, Marcus said, his voice now respectful and apologetic. I've spoken with our corporate headquarters. We're upgrading you to first class, and we're implementing immediate retraining for all our staff regarding the proper treatment of military personnel. William accepted the boarding pass, but his expression remained serious. Mr. Webb, while I appreciate the gesture, I hope you understand that this isn't really about me or this particular flight. This is about respect for service and sacrifice. Absolutely, sir. We understand that completely now. We're also going to be reviewing all of our policies to ensure that military personnel, especially those with distinguished service records, receive the recognition they deserve. The young mother who had supported William earlier approached with her children. Excuse me, sir, but could I possibly get a photo with you? I'd like my children to remember meeting a real hero. William knelt down to the children's level, his stern military bearing softening as he spoke to them. Heroes are ordinary people who do extraordinary things when they have to. Remember that anyone can be a hero if they choose to help others. The children listened with wide eyes, clearly impressed not just by his medals, but by his kindness. Their mother snapped several photos, and William could see tears in her eyes as she thanked him. As boarding time approached, William noticed a commotion near the gate entrance. A small group of officials in dark suits had arrived, and one of them was speaking intently with the gate agent. Marcus Webb hurried over to them. and even from a distance William could see that the conversation was serious. One of the officials approached William directly. "Sergeant Major Thompson? I'm David Morrison from the Palace Press Office. His Majesty has asked me to convey his personal appreciation for your service and his displeasure at the treatment you've received today." The departure lounge fell silent again as passengers strained to hear the conversation. William stood at attention, as protocol required when receiving official communications from the palace. "His Majesty has also asked me to inform you that he would like to speak with you personally upon your return to London. He's concerned about ensuring that all service personnel receive appropriate respect and recognition." William nodded formally. "Please convey to His Majesty my gratitude for his concern and my continued dedication to Crown and country." Morrison smiled. "I will indeed, Sergeant Major. His Majesty also wanted me to mention that he's particularly proud of how you've conducted yourself today. Your dignity under difficult circumstances reflects well on the Royal Guard." The crowd of passengers spontaneously began applauding, and William felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the airport's heating system. After feeling dismissed and disrespected just hours earlier, he was now surrounded by support from ordinary citizens and official recognition from the highest levels of government. Marcus Webb approached the group nervously. "Mr. Morrison, I want to assure you that British Airways takes this incident very seriously. We're implementing comprehensive changes to prevent anything like this from happening again." Morrison's expression was polite but cool. "Mr. Webb, I suggest you ensure that your company's actions match your words. The palace will be monitoring this situation closely." As boarding began, William gathered his belongings and prepared to finally begin his journey to Edinburgh. The business travelers who had witnessed the entire incident made sure he boarded first. Despite his protests that it wasn't necessary, but as William settled into his first-class seat, he had no idea that the most dramatic part of this story was still to come. His phone, which had been buzzing constantly with messages and notifications, suddenly displayed a number he recognized immediately. The call was coming directly from Buckingham Palace. William stared at his phone screen in disbelief. The incoming call showed the official Buckingham Palace exchange, but this wasn't Colonel Henley's number or even the General Palace switchboard. This was a direct line he had only seen used in the most serious circumstances during his years of service. He quickly stood up from his first-class seat, moved to the aircraft's front galley area for privacy, and answered with military precision. "Sergeant Major Thompson speaking. Sergeant Major. This is His Majesty King Charles." The familiar voice was unmistakable, carrying the same tone William had heard during countless official functions and private briefings. William immediately came to attention, even though he was alone in the aircraft galley. "Your Majesty, I am honored by your call. William, I've been briefed on the situation at Heathrow and I wanted to speak with you personally before your departure. First, let me express my profound disappointment in how you were treated today. Such disrespect to any member of our armed forces is unacceptable. But to treat a Victoria Cross recipient in this manner is particularly offensive. Your Majesty, I appreciate your concern, but I don't want this situation to be blown out of proportion. I was simply trying to travel to see my mother." King Charles's voice warmed noticeably. "William, that's exactly the kind of humility and grace that makes you such an exemplary representative of the Crown. However, sometimes humility must be balanced with the need to address systemic problems. What happened to you today has happened to far too many of our service members." William could hear the genuine anger in his sovereign's voice, but it was controlled anger, the kind that leads to meaningful action rather than empty outrage. "Your Majesty, the situation has been resolved. British Airways has upgraded me to first class and promised to review their policies. That's a start, William, but it's not nearly enough. I've already spoken with the CEO of British Airways, and I can assure you that there will be significant changes in how they treat military personnel. But more importantly, I want this incident to serve as a catalyst for broader change." The flight attendant approached the galley but quickly retreated. When she saw William speaking on his phone with such obvious formality and respect, "I'm announcing the establishment of a new recognition program for military personnel. Traveling on official or personal business," King Charles continued. "It will be called the Crown Service Recognition Initiative, and it will ensure that all service members, especially those with distinguished records like yours, receive the respect they've earned." William was momentarily speechless. He had expected perhaps an official apology or policy change, but a new royal initiative was beyond anything he could have imagined. Your Majesty, that's incredibly generous, but I worry about other service members thinking I'm receiving special treatment because of my position in the Royal Guard. King Charles chuckled softly. William, your concern for your fellow service members is precisely why you're the right person to help us implement this program. I want you to work with Colonel Henley and my staff to develop guidelines that will ensure all our military personnel receive appropriate recognition when they travel. The magnitude of what was being proposed began to sink in. This wasn't just about William's individual experience. It was about systemic change that could affect thousands of current and former military personnel. Furthermore, His Majesty continued, I'm planning to make a public statement about this incident. Not to embarrass you or create additional attention for you personally, but to make it clear that disrespecting our service members is disrespecting the Crown itself. William felt a surge of pride mixed with anxiety. Your Majesty, I'm honored to serve in any capacity you deem appropriate. Excellent. Now, I understand you're traveling to see your mother. Please give her my personal regards and let her know how proud she should be of her son, not just for his military service, but for the dignity he showed today under very trying circumstances. I will, Your Majesty. She'll be deeply honored. One final thing, William. When you return to London, I want you to attend a special ceremony at the palace. We're going to officially launch the Crown Service Recognition Initiative, and I want you there as the keynote speaker. You'll share your story and help us ensure this never happens to another service member. William's mind raced. Speaking at a palace ceremony was a tremendous honor, but it also meant that this story would become very public. He thought about Sarah's dismissive attitude and Marcus's initial indifference, and he realized that perhaps public attention was exactly what was needed. Your Majesty, I would be honored to participate in such a ceremony. Wonderful. Colonel Henley will provide you with all the details when you return. Now enjoy your time with your mother and remember that you have the full support of the Crown. Thank you, Your Majesty. Your support means everything to me and to all those who serve. As the call ended, William remained standing in the galley for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. He had gone from being humiliated at an airline counter to receiving a personal phone call from the King of England, all in the span of a few hours. The flight attendant approached cautiously. Sir, is everything all right? We'll be taking off soon, and I need to ask you to return to your seat. William nodded and began walking back to his seat. Everything is fine. Better than fine, actually. As he settled back into his first-class seat, William looked out the window at the airport below. Somewhere down there, Sarah was probably facing some very serious conversations with her supervisors, and Marcus was likely dealing with phone calls from corporate headquarters and possibly government officials. But William's thoughts weren't focused on revenge or vindication. Instead, he was thinking about all the other service members who had been treated poorly and didn't have access to the palace press office or a direct line to the king. This story was just beginning, and it had the potential to change things for thousands of people who had served their country with honor. William stared at his phone screen in disbelief. The incoming call showed the official Buckingham Palace exchange, but this wasn't Colonel Henley's number or even the General Palace switchboard. This was a direct line he had only seen used in the most serious circumstances during his years of service. He quickly stood up from his first-class seat, moved to the aircraft's front galley area for privacy, and answered with military precision. Sergeant Major Thompson speaking. Sergeant Major, this is His Majesty King Charles. The familiar voice was unmistakable, carrying the same tone William had heard during countless official functions and private briefings. William immediately came to attention, even though he was alone in the aircraft galley. Your Majesty, I am honored by your call. William, I've been briefed on the situation at Heathrow, and I wanted to speak with you personally before your departure. First, let me express my profound disappointment in how you were treated today. Such disrespect to any member of our armed forces is unacceptable. But to treat a Victoria Cross recipient in this manner is particularly offensive. Your Majesty, I appreciate your concern, but I don't want this situation to be blown out of proportion. I was simply trying to travel to see my mother. King Charles's voice warmed noticeably. William, that's exactly the kind of humility and grace that makes you such an exemplary representative of the Crown. However, sometimes humility must be balanced with the need to address systemic problems. What happened to you today has happened to far too many of our service members. William could hear the genuine anger in his sovereign's voice. But it was controlled anger, the kind that leads to meaningful action rather than empty outrage. Your Majesty, the situation has been resolved. British Airways has upgraded me to first class and promised to review their policies. That's a start, William, but it's not nearly enough. I've already spoken with the CEO of British Airways, and I can assure you that there will be significant changes in how they treat military personnel. But more importantly, I want this incident to serve as a catalyst for broader change. The flight attendant approached the galley but quickly retreated. When she saw William speaking on his phone with such obvious formality and respect, I'm announcing the establishment of a new recognition program for military personnel. Traveling on official or personal business, King Charles continued, it will be called the Crown Service Recognition Initiative, and it will ensure that all service members, especially those with distinguished records like yours, receive the respect they've earned. William was momentarily speechless. He had expected perhaps an official apology or policy change, but a new royal initiative was beyond anything he could have imagined. Your Majesty, that's incredibly generous, but I worry about other service members thinking I'm receiving special treatment because of my position in the Royal Guard. King Charles chuckled softly. William, your concern for your fellow service members is precisely why you're the right person to help us implement this program. I want you to work with Colonel Henley and my staff to develop guidelines that will ensure all our military personnel receive appropriate recognition when they travel. The magnitude of what was being proposed began to sink in. This wasn't just about William's individual experience. It was about systemic change that could affect thousands of current and former military personnel. Furthermore, His Majesty continued, I'm planning to make a public statement about this incident. Not to embarrass you or create additional attention for you personally, but to make it clear that disrespecting our service members is disrespecting the Crown itself. William felt a surge of pride mixed with anxiety. Your Majesty, I'm honored to serve in any capacity you deem appropriate. Excellent. Now I understand you're traveling to see your mother. Please give her my personal regards and let her know how proud she should be of her son, not just for his military service, but for the dignity he showed today under very trying circumstances. I will, Your Majesty. She'll be deeply honored. One final thing, William. When you return to London, I want you to attend a special ceremony at the palace. We're going to officially launch the Crown Service Recognition Initiative, and I want you there as the keynote speaker. You'll share your story and help us ensure this never happens to another service member. William's mind raced. Speaking at a palace ceremony was a tremendous honor, but it also meant that this story would become very public. He thought about Sarah's dismissive attitude and Marcus's initial indifference, and he realized that perhaps public attention was exactly what was needed. Your Majesty, I would be honored to participate in such a ceremony. Wonderful. Colonel Henley will provide you with all the details when you return. Now enjoy your time with your mother, and remember that you have the full support of the Crown. Thank you, Your Majesty. Your support means everything to me and to all those who serve. As the call ended, William remained standing in the galley for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. He had gone from being humiliated at an airline counter to receiving a personal phone call from the King of England, all in the span of a few hours. The flight attendant approached cautiously. Sir, is everything all right? We'll be taking off soon, and I need to ask you to return to your seat. William nodded and began walking back to his seat. Everything is fine. Better than fine, actually. As he settled back into his first-class seat, William looked out the window at the airport below. Somewhere down there, Sarah was probably facing some very serious conversations with her supervisors, and Marcus was likely dealing with phone calls from corporate headquarters and possibly government officials. But William's thoughts weren't focused on revenge or vindication. Instead, he was thinking about all the other service members who had been treated poorly and didn't have access to the palace press office or a direct line to the king. This story was just beginning, and it had the potential to change things for thousands of people who had served their country with honor. 1 week later, the state ballroom at Buckingham Palace had been transformed for the launch ceremony of the Crown Service Recognition Initiative. William stood at the side of the ornate room, watching as representatives from major airlines, hotel, Chains, retail companies, and veteran organizations filed in alongside military officials and government ministers. King Charles entered the ballroom and the assembled guests rose to their feet. William felt the familiar surge of pride and responsibility that came with serving the crown, but today carried additional weight. This ceremony had grown from his personal experience into something that could impact thousands of lives. Colonel Henley approached William as the guests settled into their seats. "Sergeant Major, His Majesty will introduce you in a few minutes. Are you ready?" William adjusted his dress uniform, the Victoria Cross gleaming on his chest under the ballroom's chandeliers. "As ready as I can be, Colonel. I just hope I can do justice to the importance of this moment. You'll be fine. Remember, you're not speaking for yourself. You're speaking for every service member who has faced discrimination or disrespect." The ceremony began with King Charles addressing the assembled crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we gather today to address a fundamental issue of respect and recognition for those who serve our nation. The incident that brought us together represents far more than one person's experience. It reflects a broader challenge in how we honor and appreciate military service." William listened as His Majesty outlined the comprehensive changes that would be implemented through the Crown Service Recognition Initiative. Airlines would provide priority boarding and special assistance for military personnel. Hotels would offer recognition programs for veterans. Retail establishments would provide military discounts and special services. But perhaps most importantly, King Charles continued, "We are establishing mandatory training programs to educate service industry employees about the significance of military service and the proper respect owed to those who have served." The king then turned toward William. "Today I want you to hear from the man whose dignity and grace under pressure inspired these changes. Sergeant Major William Thompson represents the finest traditions of British military service, and his response to unfair treatment has created an opportunity for meaningful progress." William approached the podium, looking out at an audience that included Sarah Mitchell's former supervisor Marcus Webb, who had been required to attend as part of British Airways' commitment to change. Also present was Robert Harrison, the retired Royal Navy officer who had first supported William at Heathrow, and James Carter, the businessman who had offered his seat. "Your Majesty, distinguished guests," William began, his voice steady and clear. "A week ago I was simply trying to fly to Edinburgh to visit my mother. I had no intention of becoming the center of a national conversation about respect for military service." He paused, looking around the room at the faces focused intently on his words. "But sometimes the most important moments in our lives are the ones we don't plan for. Sometimes change comes not from grand gestures, but from ordinary situations that reveal extraordinary problems." William spoke about his experience at Heathrow, but he focused more on the broader issues it represented. He talked about the countless service members who had faced similar treatment without the benefit of palace intervention or media attention. "The Victoria Cross I wear represents the highest honor for military valor," he continued. "But it also represents something more fundamental, the willingness to put others before yourself, to serve something greater than your own interests. That principle shouldn't end when someone leaves military service. It should be recognized and respected throughout our society." The audience listened in complete silence as William shared stories from other service members who had contacted him. He spoke about veterans struggling with invisible wounds who faced discrimination because their injuries weren't obvious. He talked about young soldiers returning from deployment who felt unwelcome in their own country. The Crown Service Recognition Initiative isn't about special privileges or preferential treatment, William emphasized. It's about basic respect and acknowledgement for those who have served. It's about recognizing that military service represents a commitment to values that benefit all of society. He concluded by thanking King Charles for his leadership and the various organizations for their commitment to change. "Your Majesty, when you called me during that flight to Edinburgh, you reminded me that service to Crown and country extends beyond formal military duty. Today, all of us here are serving our nation by committing to treat our service members with the respect they've earned." The audience rose in sustained applause, and William could see genuine emotion on many faces throughout the room. King Charles approached the podium and shook William's hand warmly. "Sergeant Major Thompson has shown us that dignity and grace Under pressure can be more powerful than anger or confrontation, His Majesty said. His example has inspired changes that will benefit military personnel for generations to come. After the ceremony, William was approached by dozens of people wanting to thank him or share their own stories. Marcus Webb, looking genuinely contrite, waited patiently for his opportunity to speak. "Sergeant Major," Marcus said when they finally spoke privately, "I want you to know that the incident at Heathrow has fundamentally changed how our company operates. We've implemented comprehensive training, established new policies, and created oversight positions specifically to prevent anything like this from happening again." William nodded appreciatively. "Mr. Webb, I'm encouraged by British Airways' response. Change is what matters, not blame. We've also established a scholarship program for children of military families, and we're partnering with veteran organizations to provide job training and placement services. We want our actions to match our words." As the evening wound down, William found himself standing with King Charles in a quiet corner of the ballroom. "Your Majesty, I can't adequately express my gratitude for your support and leadership on this issue. William, you've reminded us all that true service often means standing up for principles even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. The changes we've announced today will help ensure that no service member faces the kind of disrespect you experienced." King Charles paused, looking thoughtful. "But more than that, you've shown that individual courage and dignity can inspire systemic change. That's a lesson that extends far beyond military service." 6 months later, the Crown Service Recognition initiative had been adopted by over 200 companies across the United Kingdom. William continued his duties as a Royal Guard, but he also served as an advisor to organizations implementing recognition programs for military personnel. The simple flight booking dispute that had started everything was now referenced in training, programs, policy documents, and academic studies about respect for military service. William's mother, Margaret, kept a scrapbook of newspaper clippings about the changes her son had inspired, and she never tired of telling visitors about the day the King of England called her son personally. Sarah Mitchell, meanwhile, had used her suspension period to volunteer with veteran organizations and had become one of the most effective trainers in British Airways' new military sensitivity program. Her personal transformation from the employee who had dismissed a Victoria Cross recipient to someone who genuinely understood the importance of military service became a powerful example of how individual growth could contribute to broader cultural change. William often reflected on how a simple trip to visit his mother had become a catalyst for national change. He realized that the most important battles aren't always fought on foreign battlefields, but sometimes in airport departure lounges, where the principles of respect, dignity, and service are tested in everyday encounters between ordinary people. The Victoria Cross on his chest would always represent his courage under enemy fire in Afghanistan, but now it also symbolized something equally important: the courage to stand up for principles of respect and dignity in peacetime, when the battles are less dramatic but no less important for the fabric of society.